Right now, San Francisco has a major question on their hands. Do they bring back one of their deadliest weapons, Brandon Aiyuk, or trade him? He's figured to bring in top wide receiver money, possibly around $100 million over the course of his contract, or around $25 million annually. For 2024, he's on his 5th-year option, but there's a real possibility San Francisco decides to move off perhaps their most talented wide receiver in over a decade. This speculation has been largely based on San Francisco's cap space, but there's plenty of things they could do to change it around, like cutting Isaiah Oliver, reworking Kyle Juszczyk's contract, just to name a few. So in my opinion, it would be an absolute travesty if San Francisco cut a wide receiver who amassed over 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns, while only having 75 receptions. He also led the league with 17.89 yards a reception, and was top 7 in the league despite having limited opportunities. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, Aiyuk nearly missed his opportunity to play in the NFL. So in this video, I wanted to see what sets Aiyuk apart from other players and how he was able to go from 0 offers to being one of the league's premier wide receivers. But just because Aiyuk has been slept on throughout his career doesn't mean he lacks talent. Every time I turn on the tape, for instance, he looks like one of the best wide receivers in the game. Going into this year, however, Aiyuk was definitely not considered a top-flight wide receiver by the national media. But honestly, I don't know what they were missing. Before Brock Purdy, he had a quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo who didn't utilize his skill set effectively. But there would be plenty of times where you would watch the film and Brandon Aiyuk would be running wide open. And even this year, there was times in which he was open and Brock Purdy didn't get it to him, indicating even though the connection between Purdy and Aiyuk is great, there's still room for growth there. So if San Francisco was able to extend Brandon Aiyuk long term, you could definitely have a pairing like Burrow and Chase that could just continue to grow for years to come. Just to highlight my point, I'm going to break down some of the connections so far in the year. Unlike their other weapon in Deebo Samuel, I would define Brandon Aiyuk as a more traditional wide receiver, and that's not an insult at all. What I specifically think Brandon Aiyuk has unlocked for San Francisco is the deep ball capability in combination with Brock Purdy. You can see how Purdy is releasing this as soon as Aiyuk is coming out of his post pattern, and the rest is history. It's a perfectly thrown ball, and I would say this was the biggest part missing from San Francisco's offense in the past. Sure, they could run it or throw it underneath, but not many teams expected to be challenged deep by San Francisco's offense. That all changed with Brock Purdy and Brandon Aiyuk developing this connection. On this play specifically, you get to see what I'm speaking about. Brock Purdy is under almost immediate pressure, but pay attention to how Brandon Aiyuk just absolutely breaks these guys' ankles and leaves them in the dust. He's wide open here, making an easy target for a quarterback under duress. But even when Brandon Aiyuk did have to come up big, he did. Like on this play in the Lions NFC Championship game where Purdy makes the right read. He sees the safety jump on this route underneath, so he lets it fly to Brandon Aiyuk. But the corner makes a phenomenal play, but Aiyuk is just a little bit better with this ungodly catch. I was surprised he even brought it down, and I think that was everyone's reaction in the game. This was probably one of the most pivotal plays of the entire year. But this wasn't the first time. In week 3 against the Arizona Cardinals, Brandon Aiyuk once again made a phenomenal play. Purdy put it up there, allowing him just to run underneath it and catch it in front of 2 safeties. One of the best parts about Brandon Aiyuk's game, in my opinion, are the releases he can get on people. Here, for instance, he uses a little hesitation move to just burn this corner, and then it's just too late, and he runs it all the way in for a touchdown. Outside of these bombs though, I also think Brandon Aiyuk does a great job of finding the soft spot in the zone. When we're watching this play, for instance, Purdy is throwing to an open spot in the zone coverage, and Brandon Aiyuk stops in said open spot, so while it seems easy on the field, this is something many wide receivers actually struggle with. Another area that is extremely hard to teach is the connection that a quarterback has with a certain player. Let's take Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey for instance. Their connection is unreal. In a similar way, I've seen throughout this year, Brock Purdy and Brandon Aiyuk develop a similar connection. Here, for instance, 3rd and 2, Super Bowl. You'll see Aiyuk running a slant pattern, and Purdy throwing it before Aiyuk is even out of his break. And just to highlight how Kyle Shanahan can even be happy, he can put Brandon Aiyuk in motion like this, and then he can run a crosser or a dig pattern to pick up a major gain. The possibilities are endless. Even though Aiyuk isn't a guy like Deebo Samuel, he still has the opportunity to make a major impact on this team. For instance, even though many don't see Brandon Brandon Aiyuk as a yak monster, that's what he's been throughout his career, dating all the way back to college where he returned kicks. So now that we have a deeper insight into who Brandon Aiyuk is currently in the NFL, I want to jump back into the early stages of his career, which included getting 0 offers coming out of high school. Aiyuk was born in Rocklin, California, but actually grew up in Reno, Nevada. He played football for Robert McQueen High School, and he played wide receiver, defensive back, as well as returning kicks. As a senior, Brandon Aiyuk was All-North Nevada and was honorable mention for All-State. Despite these senior season accolades, however, Brandon Aiyuk was not heavily recruited over his course of high school, and as a senior, he received 0 offers, meaning if Aiyuk just wanted the opportunity to compete at D1, he needed to go the JUCO route, and that's what he decided to do, enrolling in Sierra College in California. As an interesting side note, San Francisco used to hold some of their summer practices at this college, specifically when Bill Walsh was coaching. And just like Sierra College played a pivotal role for San Francisco, it also was important in getting Brandon Aiyuk's career going. In 2016, he caught 29 passes for 573 yards and 5 touchdowns. As a junior in 2017, this was really his breakout year. He had 60 receptions for 960 yards, 14 touchdowns. In addition to that, Aiyuk had 2 kickoffs return for a touchdown and 1 punt return for a touchdown. After this year, Brandon Aiyuk was labeled as a 3-star recruit out of JUCO, and he had offers from Colorado State, Kansas, Tennessee, and Alabama. And he ultimately chose ASU over all of those schools because they were one of the few that saw Aiyuk as a pure wide receiver. The other schools kind of wanted to move him to the defensive side of the ball or maybe even make him just a return specialist. Across his course at ASU from 2018 to 2019, Brandon Aiyuk was able to haul in 98 receptions for 1,666 yards, and in combination with that, he had 12 touchdowns. So after this crazy career at ASU, Brandon Aiyuk did decide to enter the NFL draft, and he was considered a top-tier prospect. He came in at 6 foot, his arm length was absurd at 33.5 inches, his weight was right around 205, but perhaps most impressively to me was his 10-yard split of 1.52 seconds and his 40-yard dash of 4.5 seconds. I'm specifically going to focus on the 10-yard split, which is faster than Christian McCaffrey and right there with Deshaun Jackson's of 1.50. I think this allows Brandon Aiyuk to do is get in and out of his breaks extremely quickly. Like I showed earlier on the film, this allows him to just burn guys at times. Overall, when scouts looked at Brandon Aiyuk, they loved seeing a player that continually improved over his course of his college career. Ever since the JUCO days, you just saw Brandon Aiyuk's stats and his playing level improve, much like you have at the NFL level. Perhaps the biggest question for scouts though was Brandon Aiyuk's ability to get open downfield, especially when the other team was aggressive. Brandon Aiyuk across his college career was known more as a finesse player than a physical one. But ever since he stepped on the field for San Francisco, he doesn't look out of place. He's one of the most physical weapons that I've seen, and he blocks people with a vengeance. And now after amassing nearly 4,000 yards in 4 years with San Francisco, there's a major question. Will San Francisco bring back Aiyuk? I think the answer should be yes, but regardless, I think the story of Brandon Aiyuk is absurd. He went from 0 offers to now looking like he's going to make at least $100 million a year. And this is all a guy who also found his way in and out of Kyle Shanahan's doghouse. Ultimately, I have loved watching Brandon Aiyuk's career up to this point, and I hope to continue to watch him grow with San Francisco. But regardless of which team does decide to sign him, I think he figures to be one of the most premier weapons for years to come, much like a guy like Stephon Diggs or Jamar Chase. But ultimately, these are just my thoughts on Brandon Aiyuk, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. It would also mean a ton to me if you liked and subscribed, and as always, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.